Big Ten Media Days wrapping up today as we take a look at last year's standings. This is the last time we will see it this way, as Michigan, Ohio State, and Penn State will no longer be competing for a Big Ten championship spot against Iowa because there will no longer be divisions and a whole lot more competition. We have 4 newcomers coming over from the West Coast with Oregon, Washington, UCLA, and USC joining the Big Ten fun. And with that, I welcome in Brandon Huffman, our West Coast expert, but he's really an expert on all things college football. But let's start with USC. Lincoln Riley had a very interesting quote at Big Ten Media Days. He said USC is playing catch up in facilities, in NIL, in resources within a program. He says they're catching up in dang near every way you can think. Huff, what do you think about this underdog mentality he's adopting?
It's a little bit of a change from 2 years ago when he took the USC job, when he left Oklahoma, and he raved about the resources that USC had. He raved about all the natural built-in attributes that made USC what it was under Pete Carroll and even previously, and why he left Oklahoma and their resources. So now you're seeing a little bit of a backtrack. Does that coincide with Washington playing for a national championship just 6 months ago, with Oregon being a hot name nationally with recruiting? Is there a little bit of a goalpost moving here with Lincoln Riley? It sure sounds like it, as if it's trying to, make the expectations of them being picked 6th in the media poll in the Big Ten and trying to maybe soften the blow a little bit when they come out of the gate with a schedule that includes LSU in Las Vegas, when they have to play Michigan, and they maybe have a little bit of a tougher ride when you consider that they were really the ones that started this Pac-12 to the Big Ten exodus 2 years ago when they made the move with UCLA, but USC was a big reason for that move. So are we seeing a little bit of a lowering of expectations? It sure kind of seems like it, with USC dealing with the loss of Caleb Williams and some other losses that they're having personnel-wise. We'll see if that tune is the same if the year doesn't go as planned in USC.
It is an interesting backtrack, and kind of funny he didn't include defense in that list of things that need catching up. But another school making headlines this week is UCLA. They begin a new era in the Big Ten with their former player, Deshaun Foster, who knows a lot about the Bruins, doesn't know as much about public speaking. He's going viral for an awkward opening statement at Big Ten Media Days. But Huff, why shouldn't fans judge him by this first impression?
Well, I mean, he made a great point in a great article with Brandon Marcello and John Telty yesterday, where he said, there's a lot of coaches that were great public speakers, but didn't necessarily win. So what he was being brought in to do was not to give great press conferences. Chip Kelly answered great questions at press conference, and there was no buzz, no excitement whatsoever at UCLA. But the players loved Deshaun Foster. Scott Taylor, who's a commit to UCLA in this class, raved about what kind of coach he is to him in that article yesterday. So he's not being brought in to win press conferences. He's being brought in to win games, and more importantly, to capture the alumni and the fans that Chip Kelly basically alienated for 6 years. UCLA has had great public speakers as head coaches before. Rick Neuheisel was one of them. Jim Mora did a great job. Both have been on television. Nobody's going to confuse Deshaun Foster for a future television personality, but that's not why he was hired by Martin Jarman for. So the players are bought in, recruits are buying in, the fans are buying in, and that is what he's going to have to focus on, because clearly that Big Ten Media Day appearance is going to probably loom over him for a little while until the season starts.
Yep, there's talkers and then there's coaches, but one guy who can do both is Dan Lanning at Oregon. His Ducks have the second best odds to win the Big Ten, the third best odds to win the national championship, and this is after signing top 3 classes in the transfer portal and recruiting. So how do you see their first season in the Big Ten playing out?
It's national championship or bust for Oregon. Now, keep in mind, the last 2 years, they've been on the brink of potentially going to the playoffs or going to the conference championship game 2 years ago before they lost at home to Washington. Then they lost on the road to Oregon State in a rivalry game. Then last year, lost at Washington and then lost to Washington in the Pac-12 championship game. So they've been knocking on the door, but Dan Lanning has to beat Washington. He's got to be his rival. Now, Kalen DeBoer is at Alabama. He's no longer there to torture him, but this team is being built with the mindset that they're not just going to compete for a Big Ten title in their first year, but that they're going to compete for a national title. With Dylan Gabriel there to replace Bo Nix, with receivers like Tez Johnson, Evan Stewart to soften the blow of losing Troy Franklin, an offensive line that's got some strength like Josh Connerly, the former #1 tackle in the country. This offense has the capability of putting Oregon into a position to not just win the Big Ten, but to compete for that national title. But he has got to beat the Huskies in order to get the fans really fully behind him. Now, they're in behind him. We saw that in the offseason when there was talk he might leave for Alabama. But they want that win over Washington because right now he's 0-3 against the Huskies, 1-1 against Oregon State. And much like another coach that who's in the Big Ten is a little bit in battle for losing to his rival, it's got to be you've got to beat that rival and compete for the national championship and do both at the same time.
Well, that win against the Huskies may come easily or a little bit more easily this year because after 14 wins in the best season in school history, Washington's win total is now set at 6.5. So that just goes to show you the public expectations, the market's expectations for year one under Jedd Fisch. But Huff, what are your expectations for Washington?
I don't think that there's any reason to think that the Huskies can't be successful in their first year in the Big Ten. Now, will they be winning 10, 11 games like they did in Kalen DeBoer's first year? Maybe not. Kalen DeBoer had a lot of talent that was inherited from Jimmy Lake's disastrous regime, but that were players that were brought in under Chris Peterson. Jedd Fisch was saying at the Big Ten Media Day press conference, he had over 40 transfers and new faces that he's having to replace and bring in to the program, including at quarterback, where they lose the Heisman Trophy runner-up Michael Penix. Now there's the potential of the competition between, a transfer from Mississippi State and a true freshman quarterback that was signed with Arizona when he was there. If they can figure out that quarterback, they've got a running back in Jonah Coleman, who was in Indianapolis today, who was stellar at Arizona the last couple of years. And Jedd Fisch, what he did in year one at Arizona may have been forgettable. They lost to Northern Arizona at home. Their one win was over a Cal team with COVID, but there were signs of life there despite a depleted roster. And then in year two, you really started to see the corner get turned. And then in year three, they won 10 plus games. There's not going to be a one-win season with a loss to an FCS school on the calendar in 2024. There may not be a return to the national championship game, but I think that Washington has a great coach with Jedd Fisch, a great staff that's doing a really good job recruiting. And I think you're going to see them have a pretty strong 2024 season, even with all the new faces, especially on the sidelines.
Michigan in a similar spot, having to replace so much output from their national title team. They have to replace Jim Harbaugh, their defensive coordinator, and a program record 13 drafted players to the NFL, which includes quarterback J.J. McCarthy. So, Huff, what do you see as their biggest hurdle as they begin their title defense?
Well, it's just meshing all that offense, losing J.J. McCarthy, losing Blake Corum. They've got an outstanding running back in Donovan Edwards. Alex Orji is getting a lot of attention, a lot of buzz for what he's supposed to be able to do this year. You have Sharon Moore, who was a head coach for a number of games last year when Harbaugh was suspended. So this isn't going to be a huge transition for him. Now it's his program. Now he gets to put his stamp on the program, but he's got experience being the head coach. So despite losing a lot of talent, like you said, 13 NFL draft players, there's still some talent, especially on that defense. Mason Graham, one of the best defensive players in all of college football, regardless of position. Will Johnson, another stellar defensive back for the Wolverines. And let's keep an eye on Zeke Berry. This is a player that we loved coming out of the 2022 class. He was the All-American Bowl Defensive Player of the Year out of De La Salle. He had an injury that kind of slowed him down as a sophomore in 2023, but he's been waiting his turn, and he should help bolster that secondary for Michigan. This is a team that has prided itself on winning at the line of scrimmage, and now you've got an offensive line coach as your head coach. He wants to continue to win in the trenches, but it might be the defense that does a lot of the heavy lifting for the Wolverines this year, which is fine by Sharon Moore, who loves to win by physical.
Yep, that defense still one of the best in the country, will definitely help ease Sharon Moore into the job. Now, the Big Ten is doing away with divisions this year, as most conferences are, but the Big Ten title game has been Ohio State or Michigan for the past 7 years, and then whoever comes out of the West. So how does removing divisions change the overall outlook of this conference?
Well, it's definitely going to make it more fascinating to see how it works out, because without there being a true East-West or North-South, you might have a couple of in-season rematches of games that were played early in the year. Maybe it's Ohio State and Oregon. Maybe it's Ohio State and Michigan. Maybe it's Michigan and Washington. But doing away with the divisions almost ensures that you're going to get the two best teams. And we saw that in the last couple of years where the East champion was the dominant team, the Michigan, the Ohio State, whereas maybe the West team wasn't as strong, and maybe they were a 7-5 team who won the division. I mean, we even go back to the early years of the Big Ten championship game, where because of probation, teams that were 6-6, 7-5 got to sneak in. Well, now you don't have a gigantic gap between the two best teams because one won a weaker division and one won a stronger division. Now you're going to get the two best teams, and that's going to come in huge in the hand when you have the conference or the college football playoff taking the conference champion and pretty much ensuring a bye. That makes that conference championship game that much more important because you get a week off rather than having to prepare for another team that may be a little bit equal in talent to you, but didn't win their own conference. That's why this conference championship is going to be so great, because you're going to have two teams, maybe likely in the top 10, and they're playing for that first round bye now.
A more competitive Big Ten title game is definitely welcome in this new playoff scene. Brandon Huffman, one of the best out there. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Race.